What's happening, YouTubers? On today's episode we are talking Fujinon 23mm f2. Should you buy this lens? What's happening, YouTubers? Thanks for coming back to this channel. And today we are talking about the 23mm Fujinon f2 lens. Before we get cracking on this, I just want to thank all you guys for all your awesome comments and getting involved with my last videos, especially the Fuji X-T2 that went for repair. Not back as yet, but that's fine. I'm just waiting for that to come back. I'm not 100% sure if they're going to fix the freezing issue. By the looks of it, it probably is an issue that might not be able to be fixed. I don't know. But that's not a massive biggie for me at the moment. The major thing for me is sorting out those hot pixels, because I do a lot of landscape shooting with the X-T2 and I don't want a lot of hot fuzz in my images. So I'm waiting, Fuji, get that camera back to me, please. Before we start this video and discussing this lens, I don't like to call these lens reviews. I like to call these real world reviews because of what I talk about. So there's a caveat again. Everything I say in this video is, as always, my personal opinion. There are no wrongs, no rights as far as I'm concerned. I probably shoot differently to a lot of people out there. Some people might shoot similar to me. That's cool, but from what I say from now on is my personal opinion. But before I start on that, I want to talk about some background information. When I first started getting into my photography, I realised that my favourite focal length pretty early on was actually a 35mm or 23mm in Fuji X terms, because they're crop censored. But in full frame terms, 35mm was my preferred angle of view. And I had the Sigma Art 35mm 1.4 and I loved that lens to death. And I don't know what possessed me, but when they brought out the 50mm Art 1.4, I sold the 35 and I bought that, and I knew within a couple of hours I'd done a wrong 'un. What I should have done was kept both of them, because I believe there's a space for both lenses in your bag. Definitely a 35 and a 50mm, or a 23mm and a 35mm in Fuji X terms. So the reason I prefer the 35mm or the 23mm in Fuji terms was just purely because when I do things like street photography or take pictures in events or family, that sort of stuff, is I like to be able to tell a bit more of a story. And what I mean by that is I like to include background information within the image, so what's going on to the side of the frame or to the left of the frame, or to simply be able to crop in by having more of the image if I need to. And I find with 50mm it can be a little bit tight. So that's the reason why I prefer the 35mm or 23mm. So first of all, I'm going to start with the positives about this lens. Now, you'll notice this is the Graphite version. That's simply because the Graphite version came with my X Pro 2. I had the silver version of the 23mm, which I had glued to the front of my X-T2. But since getting this lens with the X Pro 2, then there was no need to keep a silver version, it's pointless. So I sold that and I just kept the Graphite version, because this is permanently stuck to my X Pro 2. So first positive is the build quality of this lens. If you've never owned the newer f2 versions of these lenses, so either the 35mm, the 50mm or the 23mm, I think you're in for a sweet surprise. These lenses are metal. I mean, they're all metal. The optional hood, which I'll talk about later, the focus ring, the aperture, great click to it. The actual top of the lens, the bottom of the lens, it's all metal. I mean, it's solid metal. There's no rubber going on here, there's no plastics going on here from what I can feel, other than the lens hood and the lens caps, obviously. But the build quality of this lens is second to none. But also, it retains its lightweight. So that is the first quality of this lens, and positive is the build. The image quality. So the image quality is fantastic. It's sharp, nice contrast to the images, and corner to corner sharpness. If you're shooting even at f2 is very, very good. Obviously that increases as you step up to like 2.8 or f4. With this lens, it's normally always shot at a minimum for me while I'm doing street photography, 5.6 to f8. And the detail I get from this lens is simply superb, and I mean it's superb. So it's a weather sealed lens, which is awesome. So it has the gasket that goes around the top of the lens there, that little rubber ring, which is brilliant. So obviously if you have a weather sealed camera like the X-T2 or X Pro 2, big bonus, save your camera getting wet. That is a great addition. And all the f2 versions are weather sealed, so that's a big bonus. So flare, I like to do a lot of sunburst style shooting, and I like to point my camera at the sun. I know you shouldn't really, and that's probably what messed up my X-T2 sensor, possibly, I don't know. But I love to stick this on f16 or f11 and get some really nice sunbursts. Flare is controlled brilliantly with this lens, so another big positive for it, and I don't get much, if any, kind of horrible artifacts from it. Autofocus on this lens is probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest, focusing lenses that I've ever used. It definitely is snappier than 35mm f2. I've noticed that. I was shooting yesterday and I thought, let me compare this with a 35, because I've not used a 35 in a while, and it was snappier. It seemed almost like there was a noticeable difference in the snappiness of the focus acquisition as well. It's probably because it's a wider lenses. Wider lenses do tend to focus quicker, but that's a big bonus for me because I like to take those instant shots in the street when I'm street shooting. So big bonus for that. The feel and the weight of this lens I touched on. It's a brilliant feel of the lens, it's a brilliant weight to the lens. It looks brilliant on the X Pro 2 and the X-T2, and probably on more of the smaller X cameras, things like the X70. And I think that's important because I talk a lot about what a camera feels like in the hand and what it looks like. And I'm not kidding you when I say that this lens is glued to my X Pro 2. I very rarely shoot other lenses with my X Pro 2 than the 23mm. But that's probably because I bought it more for my street shooting and my kind of candid event, wedding kind of shooting that I do. It comes in 3 colours. So although you can't buy the graphite version separately, it's still a colour. It comes in the black and the silver. So take your pick. If you buy the X Pro 2 in graphite, it will come in graphite, obviously. If you own a black version, then obviously you can get the black version. If you own an X-T2, I think the graphite, the silver version looks quite nice. I had the silver version on the X-T2. I've actually done a video on the different colour versions of this lens on the X-T2, so I'll add a link up there or wherever that is. And you can have a look at that video as well. Now, I was trying to rack my brains with the negatives to this lens because I can't really find any. It's just such a great lens. I can't really find any negatives, but there are a couple of minor negatives. One of the main negatives is I really think The lens hood sets this lens off, and it's a shame I don't include it when you buy the lens on its own. It comes with the X Pro 2 Graphite, which is brilliant, but it's a shame I don't include it when you buy the black or the silver version. It's the LHXF 35-2, so obviously it fits on 23 as well. So if you buy this lens, personally I think it's worth the extra investment to buy this hood. It works brilliantly, it controls flare brilliantly, and it also looks really, really good. So it's one stop slower than the 23mm f1.4. Now, what that means is, of course, the bokeh you're going to get from this is not going to be as good as the f1.4. Now, I've done another comparison video where I was talking about the bokeh and the outer focus areas with the 23mm f2 versus the f1.4. And even at f2 on the 23mm f1.4, it still does look a little bit more buttery, a little bit smoother than the f2 version. Now, for many of you, that probably is not going to be an issue, just simply because if you're going to be using this for street, you don't really look for that much bokeh. I mean, I don't. I like to shoot as sharp as I can. Again, like f5.6 or f8. If you're doing things like weddings and events, is it an issue? I don't think so. I think you've really got to look for it to notice it. The bokeh balls on the 23mm, even at f2 versus f2 on this one, they are a little bit nicer, a little bit more pleasing. I don't think it should bother you personally, but you know, it's all down to your personal taste. It doesn't really bother me, as I figured out recently. Specs. I don't like talking about specs, I hate talking about specs, but I'm going to include specs. I know a lot of you guys like me talking about specs. So f2 on the Aperture right up to f16. So that's pretty cool if you want to get things like sunbursts, or you just generally want to, I don't know if you'd want to do long exposures with 23mm. I mean, you can do. I personally would like to go much, much wider than that. Focal distance is just 22 centimeters, so less than a foot. Again, that can be a bonus if you do want to show depth of field. Things like rings or watches, or you know, that sort of stuff. You know, little details for events and weddings. Blades. There are 9 rounded Aperture blades. The front filter thread is just 43mm. I don't think you can see that on the video there. And weight is 180 grams or 6.35 ounces if you use ounces. Uses. What is this lens used for? A lot, actually. I use it for a lot of stuff. So if you do street photography, this is a must of a lens, and I can't stipulate that enough. This is a must. You have to get this lens if you're in street photography. I think you're robbing yourself if you don't. Now, I don't know anyone that's bought this lens and has returned it or not liked it, and I'm being serious. I bought this lens at the time thinking I wouldn't like it because I had the f1.4 version. This has now become my favourite lens, especially for street photography. I mean, I love this lens. You can use it for events and weddings. f2 is still plenty fast. Everyday shooting, and what I mean by that is things like if you're going out and you want to grab your camera, family, going down the park with the kids. First thing I grab, X Pro 2 with this lens. I might as well super glue this lens to the front of my X Pro 2. I mean seriously, I just don't use any other lenses really. So in summary, it's a fantastic prime lens. A fantastic prime lens. I can't, again, come over that more on camera than how I feel about this lens. Excellent image quality. A must prime for storytelling. So again, if you want to include more of the scene in your images, the 23mm in APS-C terms or 35mm in fourth rate terms, this is the lens to go for, even over the 35mm. Should you buy this lens? Without a shadow of a doubt, yes. Because I'm going to give you some reasoning why I say like yes. Prime lenses will help you in your photography. You can have like a kit lens like an 18-55, which is a good lens, but there's nothing better than having a fixed focal length lens which makes you work for your image. And I've said this so many times, but it's different when you shoot an image with a prime lens and you come home and edit it, and you may want to crop into it slightly. There's nothing more satisfying than knowing that you created that image because you thought about that image, because your composition, the thought of your composition went into it, the framing went into it, because you couldn't zoom in. You had to walk back or walk forward and spend time in your head making that image. I think that is so much more important about gear, is making the image. And I mean that. Get a prime lens. It doesn't matter, fine, if a 23mm is not your cup of tea, then get the 35mm. But with this, you've got room for cropping. What I noticed was with a 35mm, you shoot your image, and then if you want to crop, you're like, oh, maybe I should have shot a bit wider. With this, it's always wide enough. It's always wide enough for me to either leave it to tell a lot of the story in the image, or to slightly crop in. I only really slightly crop in. I feel frame my images quite well, and I'm not being big-headed with that. I've just kind of learned to do that automatically. So I will put a link for an Amazon link where you can buy this lens if you want to buy this lens. If you do buy this lens, I can't see you returning this lens. You're gonna love it. It's an absolute ripper of a lens. That's for all you guys in Australia. So, thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'm gonna be back shortly with another episode, excuse me. And thank you for watching. I'll catch you guys real soon. Cheers, bye.